secret bunker somewhere outside of Nashville, Tennessee. This is the award-winning podcast, ParaReality.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for listening, as always. Well, my name is Sandman, and I'll be your guide through this strange realm of ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, aliens, conspiracy theories, and other unsolved mysteries that I like to call ParaReality. Man, it is a beautiful spring night out tonight, yet here I am in the secret bunker, spending my evening with you sand fans. But once I'm through, I'm going to be going outside and enjoying the weather, just a little bit anyway, before calling it quits for the evening. Maybe spend a little bit of QT with Mrs. Sandman. Never know. Sometimes she likes to do that. Sometimes I do too. Well, tonight's episode is the third and final episode in a three-part series on the Yuba County Five. On the last two episodes, I told you a little about the boys, as they were called, and their mental disabilities, the trip that they took, and their disappearance. I've also taken a look at some of the evidence that was left behind and discussed my primary suspect, Joseph Schons. And tonight, I'll finish up by going over my top 6 theories of what happened to the boys. Now, I want you to keep in mind that everything that I've discussed in the previous 2 episodes, along with what I'm about to discuss tonight, does not in any way cover the entire story, present the complete evidence in the case, or go over all the suspects. Doing that would literally take an entire season. So what I did was condense everything down into 3 manageable episodes that basically tell you the heart of the story, the meat of the story, as they say. And as I said, laying everything all out would take an entire season, and there are podcasts out there who do exactly that. If you want to get a more in-depth investigation of the Yuba County Five, I suggest that you just do a Google search, because there are a couple of good podcasts about it out there that have actually, like I said, devoted entire seasons to the Yuba County Five, and they go in a lot more into a deep dive than I have on this podcast here. I've only done, this is my 3rd episode, so there's just no way I can do a complete and total deep dive into everything that has happened in the entire disappearance investigation, lay out all the evidence, talk about all the suspects. There's just no way I can do that in 3 episodes in a deep dive. So like I said, what I'm doing is I am presenting to you the heart of the story, the meat of the story, enough to get you enough information so that you know a little about it and can be a little bit more informed or knowledgeable when you do your own investigation or do your own research or listen to those other podcasts out there that are devoted completely to the Yuba County Five. If you haven't heard parts 1 and 2, I'm going to suggest that you stop listening to this episode right now and go back and listen to part 1 and part 2 so you'll be caught up, because the stuff in this episode is not going to make any sense unless you've heard the first 2 parts. So you have been warned. Once again, I'm going to tell you, if you have not heard parts 1 and 2 of the Yuba County Five, probably be a good idea to stop this podcast episode right now and go back and listen to parts 1 and part 2 so you'll be caught up. That way you'll understand what I'm about to discuss in this 3rd and final part of my summer series, which is the Yuba County Five. And of course, to learn more, you'll have to tune in, and find out. But now it is email time. One of my favorite times of the podcast. So this is another short and sweet email. This actually comes from YouTube once again. I think the last couple of emails that I've answered have come off of YouTube. So just keeping up with the trend here. This comes from Seth via YouTube, and it's very short and sweet. It says, "Love your stuff, man. It's really entertaining." Well, thanks, Seth. I really appreciate it. I do take pride in presenting my topics in a way that I think is a non-traditional way that most people don't take their podcast in my direction. What I like to do is I'm what I call an open-minded skeptic. So just because someone says something or just because there's a theory out there doesn't mean I'm going to believe it. I like to do my own research and form my own opinions, and that's part of why I do this podcast, besides the fact that I love doing podcasts. I like to take the evidence that I find, present it to you in an unbiased way. I just lay out the evidence, here it is, and then I let you make up your own mind, or I give you enough information that you can begin your own research. I never have a preset agenda on this podcast where I come in believing a certain thing and I feel that my job is to make you believe the same thing that I do. And on the flip side, I don't come into it, not believing something and view it as my job is to dissuade you from doing your own research or dissuade you from your beliefs. I always like to present the evidence and say, here it is, this is what I have found, this is the results of my investigation or my research. Now, here it is to you. You take that and you do what you will with it. So I think that is the best way to approach something like this. And Seth, thank you once again for your comment. I really appreciate it. If you are listening to this podcast and you have a comment that you'd like to get back on the air, just send me an email, sandman@parareality.com. That's sandman@parareality.com. Or if you listen to it from YouTube, like what Seth does, just comment on YouTube. Those are the two good ways to get in touch with me if you want to. Sandman@parareality.com, or comment on YouTube if you happen to listen on YouTube. And it doesn't have to be a good comment. It can be, you suck, or I disagree with your findings, or I think such and such would be such a good topic for the show. Anything that you want. Feel free to email me. It doesn't have to be all praise and all that, because I like to hear, from people who think I could do a better job or have an idea for a topic. I always love to hear from you guys. If you have an idea for a topic that I haven't touched, or maybe one of your favorite episodes that you'd like for me to go back and do an updated episode on. So send me that email, sandman@parareality.com. And now that I've gone over that, here's this. ParaReality is a proud member of the Straight Up Strange podcast network. To learn more about all the awesome podcasts that are members of the Straight Up Strange family, go to straightupstrange.com and get strange. Hey, how would you like to be an agent of chaos? What is chaos? It's the knowledgeable apprentices of Sandman, and that's what I call my Patreon account members. I'm looking for new agents, and I'd love it if you'd sign up to become one. There are 3 levels of agents, and all are extremely affordable, $5 a month or less. Each level offers exclusive content, along with the ability to help create podcast episodes, and even the chance to be a guest or a co-host. To learn more, head on over to patreon.com/parareality. 100% of the proceeds from Patreon goes back into producing quality content for this podcast. You are listening to the ParaReality Podcast, your information source for conspiracy theories, UFOs, the paranormal, and all things unexplained. New episodes drop the first Friday of every month at 8 o'clock p.m. Central U.S. time. Listen on your favorite podcast station. Turn on, tune in, and find out.
If you wish to change, you must first lift the veil of ignorance that has been cast over your eyes. Only then will you see the true power of the universe.
So, let's wind this thing down, this part 3 of my 3-part series, and let's talk about the theories of what happened or who did it to the Yuba County Five. Now, like I said a few minutes ago, there are 6 theories that I'm going to present here, and this by no means are all the theories that are out there. These are just what I think are probably the best theories to present to you to give you enough evidence to be knowledgeable about the case. So in part 1 of this 3-part series, I talked about the boys, who they were, their disabilities, their mental disabilities, their love of basketball, what bonded them, and the night of their disappearance, and a little bit about how their abandoned vehicle was found. And in part 2, I also talked about the search as well, and the discovery of the bodies. And in part 2, I presented a little bit of the evidence to you. Like I said, this by no means is an all-inclusive thing. It did not present 100% of the evidence, but it presented enough for you to be knowledgeable about it. So I presented to you the evidence and my primary suspect in the disappearance of the boys, Mr. Joseph Schons. And I talked a little bit about him, his background as far as what he said was happening on the night that they disappeared, and a little about his totally unbelievable story. So now we're going to wind this thing down in part 3 with my top 6 theories as to what happened to the boys. So beginning with number 1, obviously, if you hadn't figured it out by now, you should, is that I think that Joseph Schons did it. Now, we've already discussed his questionable background and his reputation, but what isn't clear at all is why he would do it. What reason would he have? Now, as I said last episode, he did have a history of selling drugs. So could it be that the boys ran up on a drug deal that he was part of? Did they witness that, and he decided that he didn't want to go to jail or get in trouble with the law, so he did away with them? He forced them up that mountain? Don't know. We know that the boys went to that ball game, and we know they went to one particular store that was a convenience store that was trying to close up shop for the night. They were the last customers, and they bought some junk food supplies. So they could have run into Schons in the parking lot of the basketball game. They could have run into him in the parking lot at the convenience store. Maybe they saw something that they shouldn't have, and he or somebody else, or maybe he collaborated with somebody else. Maybe they decided that the best thing they could do was get rid of those kids. Now, remember, the car was, when they found it, was in pretty pristine condition for it having driven on a dirt road with a bunch of ruts and gullies and stuff in it up the side of a mountain at night in the middle of a snowstorm, particularly someplace that those boys weren't familiar with. Remember, it was like 2.5 hours in the opposite direction of what their home was. So that would indicate that maybe somebody else drove that car up there, someone who was familiar with the area. And then maybe for whatever reason, the boys escaped that person, and that's how they wound up deep in the woods up the side of that mountain in the ranger shack. So maybe it wasn't Joseph Schons who drove them up there. Maybe it was an accomplice of his. And it's also very possible that Schons drove them up there as well. Another thing is that Sean's daughter went to that institute where the boys played basketball at. And it's very well possible that they could have known her. The boys went to this one, I guess you could call it, the institute is not a good word. They went to this place called Gateway, which was it was a place that was designed to help people with mental handicaps. It wasn't a school or an institute. It was basically like just a program that helped people with mental health disabilities. And we know that Joseph Schons' daughter also went to that place. So it's very well possible that one or all of those boys knew her. And maybe one or all of them liked her. And maybe Schons didn't like that. Maybe he was very protective of his daughter. And maybe he wanted to make sure that one or more of those kids didn't bother her again. Or maybe, remember, they had mental handicaps, so maybe one or more of them did something that was unwanted towards her. And I'm not saying they raped her or sexually assaulted her, but maybe they did something that made her feel uncomfortable. Maybe they approached her and asked her out, or said something else that made her feel uncomfortable, and she went home and she told her dad, and her dad, being the very protective father that he is and the shady person, the drug dealer that he was like, you know what? I'm not going to let these kids get away with making my daughter feel uncomfortable, so I'm gonna do away with this one kid. But he couldn't do away with just the one kid because there were 5 of them there, so he had to do away with all of them. That's a little far-fetched, but it is a possibility. So my main suspect is still my number one. He's going to remain my number one, and that's Joseph Schons. We just don't know what his connection exactly with the boys were, because his story that he gave about maybe seeing them up on the side of that mountain while he was having a heart attack, spending the night in his car, and then traipsing through the snow the next morning and blah, blah, blah. It just didn't make sense. And if you want to know that whole story, if you haven't listened to part 2 where I discuss it, you really need to. Or if you just need a refresher on your memory of what happened, you really need to re-listen to part 2, because I'm not going to go back over it in this part. So the second theory, that's a very popular theory, is that Gary Matthias himself did it. Now, if you remember, Gary Matthias was one of the boys. He was the one that probably had the most intelligence level, the greatest intelligence level out of all of them. He was the one that had some, his mental problem was that he suffered from schizophrenia, but as long as he took his medication, he was fine. So some believe that Matthias, for whatever reason, somehow forced the boys up that mountain, causing their ultimate demise, and then realizing what he had done, escaped into the wilderness. And that accounts for the reason that his body was never found. They found his shoes, but they never found his body. So he's the only one out of all of them that remains unaccounted for. So it's also very possible that when they did get up there to that mountain, that forest ranger shack on the mountain, that after the medication that he had in his system wore off, that he, for lack of a better phrase, went crazy and attacked the boys and killed them, or they were somehow scared of him and he ran. They ran away and out into the woods and froze to death. But that doesn't explain how they got up there. So maybe Matthias took him up there himself. Maybe he had maybe he had stopped taking his medication and had some sort of mental break, some sort of snap, and that he somehow forced him up there, forced him to drive there. That is a very, very popular theory, is that he did it, and that's only because his body was the only one that wasn't found, number one. And number two, he had the most intelligence out of all of them. If anyone could have forced him to go up there, it probably could have been him. But they were so close, the five of them, they did everything together. They were collectively known as the boys. That's what their families called them. All the families knew each other. They hung around each other all the time. They played on a basketball team together. They seemed to be a very close-knit band of brothers. So I don't know why Gary Matthias would take them and kill them, force them up the side of that mountain. To me, that just doesn't make any sense. This brings us to the number 3 theory, which is that a man named Alan Martin did it. Now, I did not talk about Alan Martin when I was talking about the suspects, so I'm going to pause for a minute. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Alan Martin and what I know of him. So a couple of months after the bodies had been found, a man named Alan Martin stopped by the Matthias' residence, and he apparently had this really guilty conscience on him and went on to tell the Matthias family a story about the night that the boys disappeared. He said that he'd been with a group of friends that stopped the boys on the bridge near the Orville Dam. And one of the men started slapping Jackie Hewitt to hear him whine and moan. Now, it was well-known fact that Jackie would start to make like a guttural whining sound whenever he was scared or stressed out or distressed in any way. So maybe, this is a plausible story here, is that this guy knew about that and he had been to the ball game, had been drinking with his friends, and decided to, have some fun with these kids, and let's make Jackie Hewitt, make his noises. Now, this apparently angered Matthias, and he basically just launched himself at the man that was harassing Jackie, and that caused the rest of Alan's group to jump on Matthias. And there was a man, according to Alan Martin, there was a man by the name of Glenn Baker who was the person who, after this fight, drove Jack Madruga's car up the mountain to where it was abandoned. Now, it's not clear as to what happened after that, but Matthias's sister, Tammy, said that she assumes that when the car was driven up that road, the boys were all inside and at one point were ordered to get out of the car. And once out of the car, they were threatened or frightened by somebody, and they took off running into the freezing woods. Now, this is what I can find out about Alan Martin, is that he went up there to the Matthias family, told them this story, but I cannot find out if, when he told the story, he told about how the boys got up the side of the mountain, or if he knew anything about that. Apparently, the only thing that was bothering him was that they were picking on these mentally handicapped kids and they got in a fight. So maybe he had such a guilty conscience about that he just needed to get it off his chest. Or maybe he was too scared to tell the family about the rest of the story. I don't know. I can't find out much information about it. I'm sure it's out there. It's just that I couldn't. So if you can find that out, good luck. I suggest that you, do your own research on that. The number 4 theory is that some mysterious pastor did it. There is a relative of the Matthias family whose name was Jessica, and she claims that a local man who apparently is still living in the area is responsible for the boys' disappearance. Now, this pastor, had known Gary Matthias and his family very well and had an extensive criminal record involving drugs and violence. However, he turned his life around sometime in the 80s and has since gone on to become a pastor. Now, this kind of ties back in with my number one suspect, which was or is Joseph Schons. So remember, Schons was a drug dealer, and this unnamed pastor is or was at the time involved in the drug trade. So remember when I was talking about it's possible that Schons had an accomplice, that maybe the boys saw him making an illegal drug deal? Well, this man could possibly very well be the accomplice that I was talking about. I don't know his name. Once again, I could not find out his name just from the research that I did. Now, I did not listen to every episode of the 2 in-depth podcasts that talked about the Yuba County Five. So maybe those people have an answer that I don't. Once again, I'm not claiming that I am presenting to you all of the evidence. I'm not presenting to you all of the theories, and I'm not presenting to you all of the suspects. I'm just giving you an overview of everything so that you can be well informed to hopefully understand what you're doing if you decide to investigate this mystery yourself. So it's very well possible that this pastor and Joseph Schons were accomplices in this. Now, I have no proof of that. That is just my personal theory, but to me, it makes a lot of sense since we have a suspect, the number one suspect in my opinion, who was known to deal in drugs, and then we have this mysterious person who has since turned his life around and become a pastor who was a criminal and was involved in drug trafficking, or the drug trade, should I say. So it makes sense that the two of them could possibly have been involved in this together, but I have no evidence. It's just a theory. The number 5 theory is what I call the mysterious phone call. Now, around about 3 weeks after the boys went missing, a Yuba City woman named Debbie Lynn Reese got a phone call. It was actually not just one, it was a series of mysterious phone calls. The first call came on March the 15th of 1978, and the caller said, "I know where the missing 5 men are," and then immediately hung up. The second call came the next day on March 16th, and this time the person that called said, "I need help because I really hurt those boys bad." And then when Debbie asked, "Who did you hurt?" his reply was, "Don't play dumb with me," and he hung up. And then the third and final call came the next day on March 17th. And the caller said, "Those 5 guys are all dead." Debbie said, "They're all dead?" And he replied, "They're all dead," and then hung up, and he never called her again. Now, it's unknown who this person was or why he chose Debbie Lynn Reese to be the recipient of his phone calls, but it sounds to me like that is a prank phone call. It's probably someone that she knew, or I don't know if she had children or what. Maybe it was just some sicko that was dialing a random number. Back then, there was no caller ID or caller lookup or anything like that, you know. Could have been just a prank caller, someone that maybe if she had kids, maybe it was someone her kids knew. You know, that theory to me is interesting only in the fact that there was someone that called up another person and said, "I know where they are, I hurt them bad," you know, but why he would just randomly call someone that he didn't know is beyond me. And finally, we get down to the number 6 theory, which is paranormal causes. Now, I can't do a episode about the disappearance of these 5 men without having a little bit of a paranormal touch to it, because after all, the name of the podcast is ParaReality, and we deal with some pretty weird paranormal things on this show. So there are some theories that are floating around online that say that this could have been the result of some sort of paranormal phenomenon like a UFO or Sasquatch or something like that, causing the boys, the group, to flee in a panic. Now, if you remember, this thing is also known as the American Dyatlov Pass incident. And the Dyatlov Pass is a Russian incident that occurred back in the 50s where a group of friends were hiking up the side of a mountain in the snow in the middle of winter and never returned home. And a search party was sent out for them. When they found them, their tents were all pretty much ripped to shreds, had been cut like from the inside to give these people an escape. The bodies were found, some with missing eyes and teeth, others all mangled up with broken bones and all this crap. And one of the leading theories is that a Yeti attacked the camp. So Sasquatch and Yeti are supposed to be cousins, so to speak. So there is a theory out there that a Sasquatch attacked the boys and killed them, or attacked them and caused them to flee up, out in the woods on the side of that mountain, or that a UFO abducted them. Now, here's the problem that I have with the Sasquatch theory. Number one, it doesn't explain how the car got 2.5 hours in the opposite direction from their home up the side of that mountain that night. Doesn't explain that. Sasquatch did not get in their car and drive them to that location. Sasquatch wasn't waiting out in the parking lot at the store where they bought their junk food at and scared them and made them drive 2.5 hours in the opposite direction up the side of a mountain and then get out of the car and run off. So if there was a Sasquatch that was involved, okay, but that doesn't explain how or why the boys got up the side of the mountain that night. And a UFO theory, to me, is a little bit more plausible than a Sasquatch theory. And the reason for that is because we know when people get abducted by aliens that there's a whole bunch of missing time, and sometimes they wind up, when they are quote-unquote returned, they wind up in a location that's not where they were when they were taken. They're abducted, their memories are like wiped, and the next thing you know, they're waking up in a totally different location from the last thing that they remember. So that is a possibility that happened to them. However, the taking of a whole car, I kind of have heartburn with. I've never run across or heard of an alien abduction theory where a whole car full of people, too, by the way, was abducted and then dropped in a totally and completely different location. After all, part of the whole thing about them abducting people is to return them back the way they found them so that they don't question anything. They just have a little bit of missing time that they can't explain. I just don't get how a UFO is going to take a whole car full of people and then put them in a different location when it just totally does not fit with the whole MO of alien abductions. But it does, if you're going to look at the paranormal aspect of it, it does make more sense than the Sasquatch angle, in my opinion. So, in conclusion here, if the boys had indeed been forced up the mountain at gunpoint or by some other threat, who was the person that ordered them to do that? Could Joseph Schons' sighting of a second vehicle, possibly a red truck parked behind Jack's Montego, explain how the boys may have been followed up the Orville-Quincy Highway? Could the boys have been following the second vehicle until they got the Montego stuck in the snow? The boys had some sort of reason to go up that mountain. Either they were told to follow someone under some sort of duress or threat, or they were in the process of fleeing from someone, or maybe they were just plain lost. Now, I'm assuming that Jack Madruga was the one that drove the Montego up that road because it was his car, it was his prized possession. He never let anyone drive it but him, and also his car keys were found in his pants pocket when his body was discovered. However, it's still hard to explain why he would have left it with the car, why would have left it with the driver's side window partially rolled down if he hadn't planned on coming back to the car in a short amount of time. Now, that's something that Jack Madruga simply would never do unless he was under duress, unless he was trying to get out of there quickly. Because remember, that car was his prized possession, and he never let anyone get behind the wheel except for him. Now, Weir, who was found in the trailer, in that ranger shack, he was alive in there for weeks, and he would have needed somebody to take care of him because remember, his feet were gangrenous. They had gotten frostbitten so bad that they had gangrene. This would have made him, without proper treatment, extremely sick, and he would have needed somebody to take care of him. So Jackie, Jack, and Bill wouldn't have been capable of doing that because their mental abilities, their intelligence level, if you will, weren't up to that task. Now, with the authorities believing that Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling had succumbed to the elements before they could make it to the forest trailer, only Jackie Hewitt would have been left to care for Ted Weir if Gary wasn't there. And Jackie wasn't able to care for himself, and he wouldn't have been able to take care of someone else. So the boys were more than likely forced up that mountain, in my opinion, but there's no evidence to prove if they were or were not. All we know is that they went up there. And since we know that they were up there, we know that there was somebody else up there by his own admission, which was Joseph Schons. Now, there are people out there who honestly don't think that Schons had anything directly to do with this. There's people who think that he was just drunk because he was a known alcoholic, and maybe he was just on one of his regular drinking binges and was out driving drunk and had stopped out the mountain lodge and then got turned around. Because remember, the lodge is only 8 miles from where that Montego was found. So if Schons had taken, let's say, a left instead of a right, he could have easily wound up the side of that mountain where he said he was. And maybe he got stuck up there, or he fell asleep in a drunken stupor when he was waiting for help. You know, there are those out there who say there's a good chance that he did, in fact, see the boys and the car, but he wasn't in any mental state of mind to really be sure of anything. And let's also remember that he was a pathological liar. So we can't really believe his story just for what it is anyway. We can't take that with a grain of salt, because he was not only a person who dealt with drugs and who was an alcoholic and tended to drink a lot, but he was also a pathological liar. So I don't know why people would think that he didn't have anything directly to do with this whenever his story doesn't add up, and he has, I don't know, he has this reputation for being a criminal. So I think the fact that people are poo-pooing the idea that he had anything directly to do with this, I think they need to stop and think again. Now, I know, or I do think, that the boys followed the snowcat tracks. Remember I said that there was a snowcat that had been up there that plowed an area, and I do think that the boys followed the snowcat tracks to the trailer. Now, what happens with a snowcat is the snowcat tracks compact the snow a lot, and it makes it much easier to walk on, and would have been the easiest way for the boys to move through the wilderness, especially at night in the dark, and they didn't have a flashlight. Now, Madruga and Sterling, remember, their bodies were found between the trailer and the car, and the investigators suspect that they died while they were walking to the trailer, which is entirely possible. We don't have any evidence of the two of them being actually in the trailer, so that's a distinct possibility. Now, there are also two other scenarios. The first is that they made it to the trailer and decided to go back to the car when Weir started to get worse, knowing that the car would be the fastest way to get help. But with all the snowstorms that had gone on, they would naturally have had a hard time finding their way back. Now, Madruga could have insisted on getting back to the car sooner because it was his car, maybe even that same night when they succumbed to the weather. Hewitt was found really close to the trailer in another direction, and he might have tried to follow Madruga and have not have known which direction that Madruga went in, and he just simply got lost. What we do know is that someone had to have been with Weir at least for a little bit. With 36 ration meals eaten, requiring the use of the P-38 can opener, the presence of Matthias's shoes, it's very likely that Matthias was one of these people. Now, if we assume that just Matthias and Weir made it, eating 3 meals a day, they would have 6 days of food. Matthias would likely know that rationing food would be important because of his military training. And he would have also avoided lighting a fire if he thought that someone was after them. So maybe Hewitt, Weir, and Matthias were waiting at the trailer, waiting for Sterling and Madruga to come back with help, but when they didn't, and the food supply began to run low, and Matthias began to get more paranoid because his medication was wearing off, maybe Matthias, maybe he just set off after them. Maybe he went to go get help himself, thereby leaving Hewitt to take care of Ted Weir. I haven't read anything about any food or ration cans being in the bed with Weir, which likely means that someone was feeding him while he was there and that there was still food. But we do know that he lost somewhere between 80 and 100 pounds, meaning that while he was alive, he would have gone hungry for some time. And if Hewitt had been left in charge of Ted Weir, maybe he may have struggled trying to determine what to do. He wouldn't know how to light a fire or even to look for other food. And when Weir passed away or looked like he had died, Hewitt might have wrapped him in the sheets, or Hewitt wrapped Weir when he determined that he needed to go get help and find the others, with the idea that it would keep Ted Weir warm. And we know that Hewitt was the most intellectually challenged out of the group of boys, and that he couldn't read. He may not have thought about checking the closets in the trailer for things like blankets or additional clothing, or he may have been too scared to do that, thinking he could get in trouble. If there were any signage, he wouldn't have been able to have read it. So what happened to Matthias? He's the only one that wasn't discovered. Well, I personally think that he died somewhere on that mountain. That park where he died in is massive, overgrown, and it's full of wildlife. And if he had wandered off in a direction that wasn't very frequently traveled, he may never be found. Unfortunately, we'll probably never know what happened to the boys, or why they got up that mountain. What we do know is that they somehow made it to that mountain. They made it to the ranger shack for some unknown reason. The families are left without much closure, and they, just like the rest of us, are continuing to seek out answers to riddles that are probably never going to be solved. So that about does it for this episode, and that concludes my 3-part series on the Yuba County Five. Like I said, this is in no way considered to be all-inclusive of the evidence, the suspects, the story. This 3-part episode is just enough so you can be well-informed and knowledgeable about it. And I suggest if you want to know more about it that you do your own research.
Do you like being scared? Does the feeling of your throat tightening in fear, leaving you unable to scream, excite you? If the answer to these questions is yes, then you should listen to Scared to Death, stories of suspense, science fiction, and horror. Scared to Death airs the 3rd Friday of every month at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Time. Tune in for the fright of your life.
Are you fed up with the way things are going in the world? Have you always wanted to say whatever was on your mind without having to listen to someone bitch about it or suffer any repercussions? Well, me too. That's why I created the Set It Off podcast. I'm sick and tired of the stupidity that's going on around here, and I'm going to let everybody know how I feel about it. So hop on board this train and fasten your seatbelt, because I'm about to set it off. Set It Off can be heard on your favorite podcast station. New episodes drop on the 4th Friday of every month at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Time. You never know what I'm going to say next. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's episode of ParaReality. If you want to leave a comment about it or anything else about the podcast, let me tell you how you can get in touch with me, because there are a few different ways, and here they are. The best, quickest, easiest way to do it is just to email me. My email address is sandman@parareality.com. That's sandman@parareality.com. Or you can find me on the official ParaReality Facebook page. Just go to facebook.com/sandman.parareality. You can post a message on my wall or slide right into my DMs. Send me a direct message. If you have a Twitter or Instagram account, you can follow me on both of those. My username is ParaRealRadio. That's @ParaRealRadio, both on Instagram and Twitter. Finally, you can always call the podcast and leave a message on the voicemail. Call me here in the secret bunker, 615-692-1170. That number is, once again, 615-692-1170. Leave me a message on the voicemail. That's the direct line here to the secret bunker. But I want you to remember this. If you decide to leave me a message, that gives me permission to play your comment back on the podcast. So if you do not want that to happen, you'll need to let me know somewhere in your message. Now, I'm always looking for interesting stories for the podcast. So if you've got a story that you'd like to get on the show, tell it to me over the voicemail. There's a 3-minute time limit. So if you run out of time, call back and pick up where you left off. So those are the ways you can get in touch with me, Sandman, here on ParaReality. Email me, sandman@parareality.com. Find me on Facebook, sandman.parareality. That's the official ParaReality radio page on Facebook. Leave me a message on my DMs, post on my wall. Or follow me on Instagram and Twitter @ParaRealRadio. That's @ParaRealRadio on both Instagram or Twitter. And finally, call me here in the secret bunker and leave me a message, 615-692-1170. Also, please don't forget to visit ParaReality.com. That's a place we can keep up on the latest paranormal news from all around the world, because I've got an entire page of the website devoted to paranormal news, and that content is updated pretty much almost daily. It's in the Para News section, and you can shop in the ParaReality radio store while you're there reading about your favorite paranormal news. You can watch some of the terrible videos that I've made for the show over the years, and you can listen to the podcast archives there in the archives section. I've got tons of audio on the website from the various incarnations of ParaReality throughout the years, along with other podcasts, Set It Off and Scared to Death. You can find all of that content for free on the archives section of the website. That's ParaReality.com. Make sure you check it out. ParaReality can be heard on your favorite podcast station. Just search for ParaReality. That's your keyword. If you have a smart speaker, you can listen there too. If you've got any of the podcast skills activated on your device, you just say, hey, play the ParaReality podcast. And I've also got a YouTube account where you can listen to the podcast there too, because I upload all of the audio for the podcast up there on YouTube, because people actually listen to it from YouTube. So it's got not only audio, but it's got some great videos like UFO and paranormal documentaries, a little news segment that I did a few times called News of the Strange. It's also got those terrible videos that I did on my very short-lived internet TV show, which was horrible, but I put those up there for your viewing pleasure. So to find the channel, just go to youtube.com/user/ParaReality1. That's the number 1. Not spelled out, just the number 1. So ParaReality1 on YouTube. Now, if you remember, I kind of disappeared for a little bit over the summer, and I told you that I was going to tell you what I had been up to. So, yeah, I think now is the time to let you know where I was kind of hiding and what I was doing. So, guys, I got an invitation. I got called up out of the blue one day by my good friend Tony Pratt, who has a local television show here in the Nashville area, and it's called Mystery Us. And my friend Tony has gotten involved with a brand new television network called Nashville Country Television. It is a streaming-only television network. It's available on just about every streaming service that you can find out there, most specifically Roku and Amazon Prime. And he started a brand new show for that network called the Weird News Network. So I am Mr. Pratt's co-host, and we take some paranormal videos from the World Wide Web. We take those videos, we kind of break them down, give our 2 cents worth, our opinions on them, and make a determination on whether or not that's paranormal in nature or not. We also do a couple of other things. We talk about some different paranormal type subjects, but it's mainly where we are just dissecting paranormal videos that we find on the internet. So if you have Roku or if you have Amazon Prime, download the Nashville Country TV app where you can watch the Weird News Network. It's an on-demand show that's available. You can watch it anytime, and it made its debut last month in August, and we are very proud of what we've been doing. We've shot several episodes for that. It's up and running on Weird News Network on the Nashville Country Television app for Roku and Amazon Prime and all of that. If you've got a paranormal clip that you want to send in to the show, just send it to me, sandman@parareality.com. It can be a 10-minute long video. It can be a 10-second long video. It can be any length that you want, as long as you can email it to me and I can download it. Let me know what it is that you filmed, the location, and when, and we will do our best to get it on the air. So that's kind of what I did on my break, was I started filming the Weird News Network with Mr. Tony Pratt, and I'm very, very thankful for him to him for calling me and asking me to be his co-host on that television show. Now, it's not anything that's major like, Paranormal Caught on Camera or any of those other type shows or Jack Osborne's Fright, whatever he does with the Ghost Brothers Fright Club. It's not anything that's popular like that, but it is something that a little project that he and I have had the privilege of working on together. He had the privilege of being asked to join that network thanks to his work here locally in Nashville, and I was privileged for him to call me up out of the blue and say, hey, I need a co-host, and I couldn't think of anyone better than you. So once again, Weird News Network, hosted by Tony Pratt and myself, is available on streaming services such as Roku and Amazon Prime, on the Nashville Country Television app. Feel free to download it so you can watch our little TV show, Weird News Network. Everyone, the next episode of ParaReality is going to drop on September the 23rd at 8 o'clock p.m. Central U.S. time. So make sure you turn on, tune in, and find out. I hope that this podcast opens up your mind to new ways of thinking, expands your consciousness, and produces a change in the way you see the world. If you wish to change, you must lift the veil of ignorance that has been cast over your eyes. Only then will you see the true power of the universe. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, a wonderful evening, and I will see you again on September 23rd.
If you wish to change, you must first lift the veil of ignorance that has been cast over your eyes. Only then will you see the true power of the universe.